Hello and welcome to Bubble Pop. I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. This is the show where we talk about some of the biggest headlines and juicy news tidbits so you don't have to doom scroll. And for season 2, as you guys probably know by now, we're doing it live. Just a little reminder that if you want to support the show, you can subscribe on Patreon, Substack, and YouTube, as well as anywhere you like to listen. You can also use the super chat function on YouTube while we're live to ask questions that we'll do our best to answer at the end of the episode, provided they're appropriate. All right, folks, let's pop some bubbles, shall we? Today, we've got a very good friend of the show back again to help us check in on the state of Canadian politics. That's right, Paris Marx is back. Paris is the host of the podcast Tech Won't Save Us. He's a tech critic, an author, a podcaster, and is usually the first person I text when I see unhinged politics news. So, Paris, welcome to Bubble Pop.
Thanks so much. I always enjoy the text messages. So
yeah, me too. I have a lot of fun just bombarding you. So
of course, I bombard back. So it's mutual. It's all
it is.
good.
It's a mutual bombardment.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's like the worst segue ever because what we're about to talk about. But
shit.
so I know. Oh, canceled. So I wanted to open by briefly touching on the sort of major story of this week, which is the ceasefire deal. Hamas has said that the U.S. has given assurances that this deal means the genocide in Gaza has, quote, ended permanently. It's unclear exactly how the U.S. is going to ensure that that is indeed a lasting peace. They have sent 200 troops to be on the ground, but aside from that, it's, it could just be more Trump luster. It could be something more significant. But a lot of people just speculated the whole motivation for Trump here was that he wanted to win the Nobel Peace Prize today, which he didn't. So, maybe he'll be in the running next year. But just your quick thoughts on, just your quick thoughts on this massive development.
Yeah, I'm just like hearing some violin music for Donald Trump right now. The poor guy, not getting his Nobel Peace Prize.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know what even to say, right? I admittedly I've had a busy week, so I haven't been able to look over like all the details of the deal. What I've had seen obviously has me skeptical, right? Like we know how often Israel breaches these agreements, and of course, when Mark Carney was asked about it in the House of Commons the other day, he was like, "Yeah, we just need to see if Hamas is gonna like stay true to this deal." It's like, yeah, I'm more concerned about the other side actually.
Yeah.
Because they were still slaughtering people up until like, the minute it took effect. And I believe some people said after, but I don't want to say that, confirm that. But
yeah,
I
definitely
think,
at least 29 the day of.
Yeah, exactly. And so from what I've seen, I'm even skeptical about the deal itself and like what it's actually going to look like if something like this does come into effect, right? Because the Israeli military does not have to immediately withdraw from the Gaza Strip, just from a piece of it, and they can still control other aspects of it. And it really looks to me, if you look at kind of the map that they've released and the aspects of the plan that they have put together, it really looks like trying to make Gaza a place that is attractive for American, Israeli, and Gulf capital to basically build up, right? It seems far less about Gazans and Palestinians and much more about these different interests being able to capitalize on basically this tragedy, right? So I don't know. Like I hope this means that no more Gazans are going to get slaughtered. I hope this means that sure, Israeli hostages get to go home, but also that all of the Palestinians who are being held in Israeli prisons and detention camps get to go home as well, right? Which we never hear the media and our politicians talk about. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see what happens. I'm still very skeptical, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in the same boat. I mean, the fact that Israel has shown zero respect for past ceasefires and I'm even concerned about what they might do once the hostages are gone. Not that they showed much respect or deference to the reality that there were hostages there. But it's a nerve-wracking time, but it's as close as we've been, which, we have been here before, but hopefully this one sticks.
Yeah, we know that like the only thing that holds Israel back is the United States, and it feels to me like like Trump used some of the leverage that he has in order to force Netanyahu and to force the Israeli government to sign on to this deal, right? I'm sure it still leans in the favor of Israel. I have little doubt about that, but still seemed pretty clear up until recent days that they did not really want to have to sign on to it, and that it was ultimately Trump forcing their hand in order to do that. And so again, if Trump hasn't won the Nobel Peace Prize, is he going to feel, less motivated to kind of keep them in line, or is he actually going to try to see this through and essentially tell what is an American client state that America has the say on this. This is what they're doing, and Israel needs to back off, or else. So we'll see. It depends on the United States a lot too.
If you guys hear a little barking in the background, sorry, my dog's getting a little agitated. The joy of doing things live. But I did want to stick on the topic of Trump just a little bit longer, because the other sort of big news in Canada this week was that Trump and Carney had another White House meeting. I guess I'm just kind of wondering what you thought of this latest sort of White House humiliation ritual. It feels like at this point, he trots out these world leaders and has them kiss the ring, and says all kinds of embarrassing things while they continue to kiss his ass. Trump was making jokes about the 51st state again. And actually some Americans were claiming that Carney was kissing Trump's ass. What did you think? Did you agree with that take from the Americans and some Canadians? What do you make of that meeting?
I was rolling my eyes intensely as I was seeing a bunch of Canadians say that actually all of his sucking up to Trump was part of a big plan, and was not actually sucking up, but was actually his way of like needling Trump by saying that he's so great and has been doing so many great things, because transformative doesn't have to mean positive. It can mean negative as well. It's like, what world are you people living in? Like, he's gone down there to kiss the ring to try to suck up to Trump because that's what Trump expects, because they're still trying to get a deal after all of this time. And it seems pretty clear, that has become very difficult to get, because the United States is focused on other things. The United States is trying to steal industry from Canada. And of course, the big news for me coming out of this meeting was now all of a sudden the Keystone XL pipeline might be coming back. Like, what the hell is up with this? We're talking about ramming a pipeline through to the West Coast to serve Alberta and Danielle Smith, and now there's another pipeline potentially in the cards as well, going to the United States that felt like it was dead a decade ago. So yeah, like I don't know. I'm sure some people are trying to like smooth this over and pretend as though it's totally okay that Carney is doing this, but like, some of the stuff that we talk about, like, this is clearly like an authoritarian president in the United States. We see him deploying troops on his own people, in cities across the country. And it's kind of like, at what point does, our prime minister sucking up to a leader like that just become like completely unacceptable? And to me, especially when we talked about elbows up and we talked about, kind of defending Canada and all this kind of stuff, I feel like it's reached that point long ago. And obviously that is going to have implications for the Canadian economy if we do that. But again, I think this comes back to the point about like what's most important, the economy, our values, what's the balance here, and I'm not sure the balance is exactly right.
Yeah, I'm increasingly on the same page with that. I mean, it's funny. I remember during Carney's first meeting with Trump, the use of the word transformative was something we all went nuts for, because of the fact that it had that dual meaning. We were like, oh, that's so smart. But I feel like that works once. You can't just use the same word again and again after Trump takes it well and everyone takes it the second. I feel like you got to maybe get a little more creative than that, particularly if your actions surrounding it seem to be repeatedly capitulating to Trump's demands. And that's sort of the context that we're dealing with. But that leads me to my other question, that is the aspect of this that I personally struggle with sometimes in trying to make sure that I'm being fair while I'm criticizing Carney, and recognizing this authoritarian threat and the fact that this guy that they're dealing with, Trump, is such a I don't want to say unique because this archetype has existed like throughout history, but in terms of the Canada-US relationship, I don't think we've ever dealt with anyone quite this volatile and fascist. Trump labeled Antifa a terror group, and we already saw that one professor actually had to flee to Europe over the ensuing Antifa allegations, which came from Turning Point USA. We've also seen that Trump and his officials have said they're going to use the full power of the government to go after Antifa, which once again is an ideology, a philosophy rather than an organization, which in effect allows them to just go after anyone who they deem to be part of this ideology, which is so loose, and sort of repress and crack down on them. So I guess my question in this context is, and it's a hard one. I don't think you and I would figure it out today, but do you think that we should be drawing a harder line with Trump? Like, what's the right kind of approach as an economy that's so interdependent as a result of, free trade deals over the decades? How do we deal with this without destroying our country?
Oh, yeah, I'm not denying that it's a difficult kind of what would you say, tightrope walk to be on right now. Melanie Joly laid out kind of part of her plan for. She used three words to like talk about what she's doing with the Canadian economy, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. But it's essentially like finding new markets, defending the economy, creating more kind of resilience, innovation, whatnot at home. So like they are working on things, but obviously like reorienting the economy takes a long time. And when you're in this degree of geographic proximity to the United States, then that is not going to wholly go away. But I also think like it's hard to present Canada as this like kind of country that cares about international law and all these sorts of things, while at the same time ignoring what the United States is doing, especially when you're often trying to present yourself in contrast to the United States, right? But of course, if you go harder on Trump, that also means that any kind of deal is going to get harder to find, and potentially tariffs increase as well. And so obviously that is kind of, a game that you need to balance. But, with this government, like I really don't think we're going to see them push back on these things anyway, because we've already seen them, kind of seek to move aside environmental regulations for projects that they pick out to do that. They've of course introduced the border bill that is very draconian. I know has had some changes in the most recent introduction, but is still not the kind of thing that I think we would otherwise usually accept. Yeah, and as you talk about like the war on Antifa that the US government and Donald Trump are launching, to me, it's hard not to think back to like the war on terror, right?
Yeah.
And how that was not so much like a war on a country, but a war on an ideology, right? They would say radical Islam or whatever, but it's this kind of like jihadist ideology. And we have already seen aspects of that come home with the significant militarization of the U.S. police forces, because there was so much excess kind of military hardware and they needed somewhere to put it, so they put it into police departments at home. And we've seen kind of the crackdown on people's rights and stuff over the past number of years. And so to a certain degree, like obviously you say like it is this kind of like fascist government, this increasingly authoritarian government, but to me, it's always like, you see these things happen abroad, right? That the U.S. does abroad, and then eventually they work their way back to the core, right? And it feels like that is kind of part of what is happening at the moment, where it's like these tendencies that have been built into the U.S. system for so long are now being deployed on its own people in a much in like a much more visible way. I think Black people and certain minorities have faced this for a long time, Indigenous folks in the U.S. But now it's like political opponents, yeah, you're fair game.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying. And I don't know, I also feel like there's more we could be doing. There's that expression that when the United States sneezes, Canada catches a cold. And I do also feel like as we are reckoning with how to handle this increasingly authoritarian government to the south of us. There's also a lot more we could be doing to safeguard ourselves against sort of catching that cold that I feel like we're just not doing. We're just not recognizing the growing threat that exists in any type of institutional systemic way. Like I do think that we should be having real and honest conversations about this kind of language making its way into the House of Commons. We just saw Michelle Rempel bring forward a bid to end birthright citizenship for temporary residents in Canada. And it's just, I feel like we need to make sure that we're being vigilant. And I sort of wish that even if it's just lip service, we had a bit more lip service going towards enforcing those norms, because there's a lot of lip service going towards the opposite, which is destroying those norms. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that aspect of it, that sort of rhetorical game.
Other than Michelle Rempel Garner is terrible and
Yeah.
kind of like a stain on Parliament. But so many of those conservatives are really. I don't think it's wholly surprising. Obviously, we've seen our Conservative Party in Canada. I've never been a Conservative supporter, but go even more and more to the right over the years. And it feels like if Stephen Harper's Conservative Party kind of like kind of did the work of moving Canadian society slightly more to the right, it's like Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives are really picking up, the baton and just running with it, right? To try to really institute this project that I think Stephen Harper always was interested in instituting, but didn't feel he could take the Canadian public to that degree, right? And now Poilievre is trying to use very deceptive political framings in order to try to get there. Not to mention, kind of real challenges that exist within Canada for a lot of people at the moment. And it doesn't help that the Liberal Party is now a very openly right-wing party as well. For all the criticisms I had of Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney is like an old progressive conservative, basically, to a certain degree. And it's like there's no real even center, let alone a left, it feels like, in Canadian politics at the moment.
Yeah, I feel like that's really I don't want to like take the responsibility away from the conservatives who are choosing to do this, but it's fascinating seeing the way that it almost feels like the liberals are, I guess, calling their bluff, to put it nicely, by they're governing in this conservative way because Canadians wanted some kind of a change, and so they basically transformed themselves into the Conservative Party. It felt like a sort of at least center right conservative party. And so as a result, I think the Conservative Party feels as though it has to go further and further right to distinguish itself from Carney eating their lunch. They're obviously also doing some things like eating the NDP's lunch, going for workers and things like that. But it's just unfortunate because it feels like in the pursuit of political victory, we're not really paying attention to the ways in which we're shifting the Overton window of our politics in the process. So
Yeah, I also think parts of it
yeah.
like don't even work for Carney's political program as well. Like, some of it is just like, okay, we're giving capital exactly what it wants, right? And they're going to be thrilled with us, and they're Carney's big buddies, so that's all fine. But it's like the immigration aspect to this to me is just like kind of shocking. Like it's really wild to me because I saw a report just recently that the Canadian population will probably like barely grow this year at all after like a number of years of significant growth. But it was immigration growth that was kind of propping up economic growth to a certain degree, right? You're adding so many more people, they are spurring economic activity, they are buying things, all that kind of stuff. But Carney has really bought into this point that was kind of set up by the previous Trudeau government, but that the Conservatives have really been pushing, that we really need to rein in immigration of so many different forms. And I would argue that has meant that we have missed out on the opportunity to get more international students, as they have been worried about going to the United States, potentially of getting some of like the academics and researchers that are looking to flee the United States. But more than that, it's like, if population growth is close to zero, which is just a wild thing, like, even in regular years, you wouldn't have that. And the economy is like struggling anyway, then you're virtually guaranteeing like a recession to come as a result of that. Or, a much, if you're someone like Carney, who's focused on those aggregate numbers above everything else. You want economy number to go up, line go up, all that kind of stuff. It's like it really doesn't seem to fit. And again, like I think that it's blaming the easy target for a problem that is much more deeply rooted. Like to me, I really don't believe that the biggest problem in the housing crisis is immigrants. It's like, our developers and all that kind of stuff, but we don't want to target them because it's easier to go after international students and stuff.
Yeah, it's the financialization of the housing market that has increasingly treated housing like a commodity to be invested in and profited off of, rather than, the human right that it is. And so when immigrants arrive, that gives you an easy villain, I guess, for people who already are afraid of difference. But it's gross because you're attacking immigrants in the name of protecting capital and wealth, which is just pathetic.
Totally.
Yeah. Speaking of people protecting capital and wealth, a new profile came out about Mark Carney this week. That was an interesting one from Maclean's. It's by Steve Maher.
That photo as well is just like,
I know.
Perfect.
Yeah, if for those of you who are going to be listening on audio when this is available later, Mark Carney's just sort of sitting. I don't know, actually, Paris, do you want to take a crack at describing this, how you see it?
Yeah, I would say, he's like sitting very confidently in a chair, like the way that the lighting is done, like, kind of gives him like kind of like an ominous omen. And then, of course, the towers of Bay Street, I imagine it is, are like in the background behind him.
Yeah, it's very, very wealthy and powerful kind of positioning. And in this piece, we learn a lot about Mark Carney. But the thing that really struck me right off the bat was the anecdote that Maher included about Karina Gold. So basically, it sounds like, for those of you who followed the Liberal leadership contest, Gold was sort of the more out of the lot, the most progressive, and she needled Carney a few times, but it was never really anything out of the norm for politics. She didn't go low, I would say, by any stretch of what we've seen in modern politics. And when he won, she reportedly asked if she could stop by and congratulate Carney, and Carney said no. And apparently that he told his team that he didn't ever want to see her again, which is
so wild.
It's so wild. And so the staff sent Gold a non-committal answer because they didn't want to offend her by saying exactly what Carney said, I guess, reportedly. And apparently she showed up anyway, and that led to a brief, awkward meeting. So this leads Maher to determine that Carney has the skin like a peach. So very thin-skinned is what he's getting at there. I mean, what was your reaction to what we learned in this profile? Even just that first anecdote.
Not at all surprised. Because this like aligns with, basically like other stories that we have heard about Carney. This piece repeats the fact that he has kind of changed the dress code, within the PMO to make sure men are always wearing black shoes, and, they need to have like a certain degree of formal attire and be wearing ties and stuff like that because he wants it to be like the business world, and because he's like an old school religious guy, and this is how he feels that it should work. Of course, there's also been reports that he makes them all write in British English instead of Canadian English, which is
that's bearing out
to me.
It's in his press releases. Like he wrote that Canada.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So I got people kind of dogged on me for pointing this out, but to me, it's just odd at a time when we're really defending our sovereignty too. Because what he did was he wrote, there's one specific example when he was recognizing a Palestinian state and announcing that he wrote recognizes with an S and not a Z. And Canadian English does tend to, we pick and choose between a lot of like American or British spellings. But, as someone who went to journalism school and had to learn the Canadian Press Style Guide of how we choose to spell our words in Canada, recognizes is one of those ones that we use a Z in. And so it's just odd to prioritize foreign spelling, whether it be American or British, over what has traditionally been Canadian. I find that odd. One person called Mark Carney a Tibu, in response to that, like a weeboo, which is someone who's very overly passionate about Japanese culture,
Okay.
but a tea-boo, which is like the British version, I guess. I thought that
Okay.
was very funny. But yeah, so it's anyway, sorry, I'll let you continue with your reaction to the piece. But the British spelling thing is it's just an odd tidbit. It's obviously not worse than some things we've seen from Polyev, but like it's still something odd that I think is worth highlighting.
Yeah, but I just think it suggests like his kind of infatuation with Britain and stuff, right? It's why at the first opportunity he wanted the king to come over, because that's an institution that he cherishes in a way that I would argue a lot of Canadians do not, right? But unlike the Karina Gould point, Karina Gould does not hold any kind of special place in my kind of I don't ascribe her much importance. To me, Karina Gould is the person who was brought in by Justin Trudeau to kind of strangle proportional representation in its crib, even though she, did some of her academic studies on why we should have proportional representation. So, I don't see her particularly positively, but even still, she did represent a more progressive vision in the leadership race. And I don't think anyone who really watched that leadership race could say it was very contentious. They were all being very friendly with one another, and taking little jabs here and there just to like make it appear as though there were some disagreements. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that Carney is, a very thin-skinned man, someone who does not like to be criticized and who likes to exert his power above everybody else, because we see that time and again, and the indications that we've received from his office and from places he's worked previously, from people who have worked for him previously, suggests that he is not a great person to work for. There was an anecdote in the piece as well, that he was in the House one day, like kind of reviewing his answers before question period, and Mélanie Joly came up to speak to him about something, and he didn't even like look up at her. He just like waved her off. Like, yeah. So
Wow.
this is the kind of guy
It's
who
just,
we have as prime minister. Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, and this is the thing that makes this worth talking about really beyond many other, like, it's funny a little bit to rag on the infatuation with British culture, but the aspect of it that I genuinely think is concerning and is bearing out slightly in the choices he's making as a prime minister is the fact that it always seems to be women. It's the Melanie Jolie story you just said, the Karina Gould story in this situation. We've got the way that he reacted to female journalists during the campaign repeatedly. He tended to lose his temper more quickly with female journalists and sound frustrated. I highlighted this during the campaign. Chantal Hébert also highlighted this. It's not like she and I are going for drinks. I wish we were, but so like people are independently
Need to go
watching
meet her at
him.
the market.
I know, but people are independently coming to these conclusions, watching his behavior. And I just think that it all sort of adds up in a way where you have a decision maker where this could bear out in the kinds of people he puts in positions of power, particularly behind the scenes. And reportedly it has. There was rumors when he first came into office that it was a boys' club. That's what I heard from people who were, senior liberal sources. And I wasn't the only one hearing that. I saw Susan Delacour also post this. So and Althea Raj also said this. So all of these, people who are watching, particularly women who are avid watchers of Canadian politics, were highlighting this issue. And now look at Wage. Look at these, that's the women and gender equality, this department, just getting sliced down, made into a minister of state. And, I might be a little incorrect there, but just there's major cuts that people are worried about coming to Wage. And yeah, it's just, those are the ways in which these sort of seemingly silly or gossipy stories bear out in a very real way in the kinds of policy impacts and governance impacts and decision-making at the highest level of our country that make them worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. We have another target here. another gentleman, liberal gentleman we're going to talk about. My old boss. your favorite.
Okay, yeah. I was like, wait, who? Yeah. All right, yeah. I hate
Evan
this guy.
Solomon. Evan Solomon, everyone. So, full disclosure, I was his producer on CTV Power Play for a while. So, I worked with him like every day for a not insignificant amount of time. Heard him pluck his acoustic guitar during meetings from time to
Oh
time.
my God.
But yeah,
See him
I you know,
sell any high valued art to anybody?
oh, I mean, never tried to me. But then again, there's no way I could afford it on a CTV salary.
Yeah.
So, but you know, your bread and butter is tech criticism, despite rumors that you're funded by Peter Thiel. Which I'm just kidding. Sorry, guys, it's a bit of an inside joke. But I haven't been following the AI file as closely as you, so I would love to hear from you. Like, how is my old boss doing here?
Terribly, but exactly as the industry would want him to be doing, you know. Um, he set up this kind of new, what'd you call it, panel, or kind of these kind of working groups recently, that are very like industry dominated, in order to kind of shape and guide the government's AI policies. And then he's finally started doing some more interviews recently, which are again not very hopeful in what it sounds like the department is doing. Of course, it's already scrapped the AI rules that were being worked on under Justin Trudeau and his government. And if you look at this interview that he did recently on CBC Power and Politics, he is basically being asked by David Cochrane, the host there, what the government strategy is, and whether it has any concerns about certain rollout of AI in different sectors. And Solomon is like, yeah, we're definitely concerned about what this means for privacy and for deepfakes, which are real things that we should be concerned about. But to me, it feels like talking about privacy and deepfakes and kind of stopping there feels like maybe you could have gotten away with that in 2023, right? When generative AI was still pretty new on the scene, and we hadn't really seen the wider implications of the rollout of this technology and how it was going to be used. But now it's like we have these like we have a ton of reporting and investigation into the environmental impacts of these major data centers that are being built out in order to power generative AI. We see the impacts on workers in certain aspects of society, whether that is, I think there are real concerns about what it's going to mean for the public sector as it's rolled out there, but in particular, like creative communities and things like that, where we've actually seen a tangible impact so far. If you're someone who's concerned about productivity and economic growth, there's a growing number of reports that suggest that these tools are really not contributing to productivity growth, or is not actually making things easier for workers. So it's not actually helping like the bottom line of these companies. So why would you spend all this money on a very costly tool to roll it out? And then, paired with that are these growing stories we hear about, this notion of AI psychosis, or like the kind of mental health breaks that some people are having once they become really dependent on these chatbots and tools and things like that. And so it's like, okay, yeah, AI or privacy and deepfakes, sure, should be discussed, but like if that is the scope of what you're looking at for the potential harms of these technologies, and whether it should be rolled out, like I think you're really missing the bigger picture here. And of course he would want to miss the bigger picture, because he is trying to do basically what the industry wants him to do, which is to promote the rollout of these technologies. So, I think it's terrible what's going on here, but I'm not really surprised.
Yeah, it's just sort of another concerning action related to workers that we're seeing from this government. And another big one is what's going on with Canada Post right now. I don't want to move on too fast if you had anything else you wanted to say about the AI issue, but I felt like you covered it pretty well. So
I feel like that's like the key developments recently,
Yeah, just a perfect Paris roundup. But yeah, so the Canada Post strike just last night, actually, they announced that they are scaling back the strike action slightly. They are going to switch to rotating strikes as of Saturday, which will start some mail and parcels moving, but they're going to continue fighting for a better agreement. But that action initially started around the time that Joel Lightbound, the government transformation minister, which I find to be
Oh my
a
God,
very
is that his
stupid title, yeah, said that the Crown Corporation is effectively insolvent. Which is fascinating. I mean, you never hear that said about things like the police, but it, yeah. And has the government opened the door to allowing Canada Post to make major changes that actually Trudeau's Liberals campaigned against in 2015 when
including
Harper,
Joel Lightbound himself.
yeah, when Harper wanted to do stuff like end door-to-door mail delivery, which now the Canadian government is telling Canada Post that they are allowed to do if they so wish. That's my understanding of the situation. And what you hear again and again in the media is about how it's losing tons of money, Canada Post, but are services supposed to be, profitable? Like, are we talking about how much the police profit every year? I guess what I wanted to ask you is like, what do you think of this current labor action, especially in the context of the others that we've seen? And what kind of ramifications will its outcomes have for not just Canada Post, but labor in Canada more broadly?
Yeah, can you imagine if the government was like, the K to 12 schools aren't really making money, so we should probably like wind them down, right? Or defund them because this doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. And there's so much I can say on this, but I actually want to go back to what you were saying about the British aspect of Mark Carney, like kind of loving Britain, right? In the UK, they privatized the Royal Mail. I believe it was a little less than a decade ago, something like that. It's been a shambles doing that, but of course the UK is a much smaller country as well, right? Canada is a massive country. A delivery service is very important, especially for all those rural and remote communities and whatnot. And so to me, part of me also looks at this and is like, Carney loves Britain. Britain privatized its post office. Maybe he's like, yeah, Britain did it. We can do it too. Doesn't really matter. But we can't just like do it overnight. We need to, do it in stages, right? Or else people will be really pissed about it. Side note, it was actually a woman from Newfoundland who oversaw the privatization of the Royal Mail. And she was previously the head of Canada Post under Stephen Harper. And we have reporting that she went to Harper and pushed for him to privatize Canada Post, and he actually basically told her to fuck off. So Stephen Harper did one thing well, I guess. So basically what I would say is, I think there are so many terrible things about this, right? The key point that Canada Post is a public service. It's ridiculous that it should be having to make money in this way, that the government should be expecting this to happen. The changes that Lightbound announced effectively mean that Canada Post can close a bunch of post offices. And one of the key things that I feel like hasn't been getting the attention that it possibly deserves is that he also kind of reduced the delivery timelines or lengthen them. So it means that for a number of things that Canada Post used to send by air, so it would have to arrive in a certain amount of time, can now be sent by ground. So it will take a lot longer for those things to actually reach, to reach the receiver, the person who's receiving it. And that, reduces the quality of the service, the dependability of the service, because now it's going to take longer to receive a piece of mail or a package or something like that, depending on which form of postage that you choose. So again, it's like degrading the service standards of Canada Post. Now, on the labor point, effectively what we see here is Canada Post management and the workers have been basically trying to find a collective agreement for quite some time now. Of course, they were on strike at the end of last year. We can remember that, and the government forced them back to work. They have been trying to negotiate a new collective agreement, but management has been very resistant to giving in to any of the terms of the union, and they have not really faced much pressure to have to do that. So the government stepping in and announcing these changes at a time when they're still negotiating a collective agreement means that the workers effectively have no leverage anymore. Because the government is clearly on the side of management, is open about it, is allowing management to undertake the changes that it wants to do. And we have seen this in the negotiation that occurred since Joe Lightbound's announcements, where the management was supposed to present an offer to the union. I believe it was 2 Fridays ago, and they didn't do that, and they delayed on it. And then when they did finally present an offer, it effectively made no changes, and I believe even rolled back some things that it had offered previously. And so the union was like, we can't accept this, but also they're clearly not negotiating in good faith because they know that the government is on their side, that the government has adopted their narrative of what the problem with Canada Post is, and is making changes that, kind of go from there, because the changes that the government announced are based on what is called the Kaplan report, put together by this guy William Kaplan, which is again built on the foundations of the story that Canada Post management is telling about the problems with Canada Post, that seeks to reduce delivery standards, close post offices, make more workers like kind of part-time and contract. This is their goal, right? And obviously something that the union is trying to stop. The union obviously has a different story for the problem with Canada Post right now, but you will never see that reflected in media coverage, in any of the narrative about Canada Post, because everyone seems to have given in to this narrative that's coming from management because they have been more effective at communicating it. After Lightbound's announcement, I followed a lot of the media on the announcements that Canada Post was making, and effectively what we saw there was the only kind of program that I saw even mentioned the narrative that the union puts out, the explanation that the union puts out for the problems Canada Post is facing and where the deficit comes from, which they say comes much more out of capital spending that Canada Post has been doing rather than operational spending, was CBC's about that. And it was, only mentioned in kind of like the second half of the program, and then still ended by kind of reaffirming management's narrative, So I know those are like a lot of details, but effectively what we're seeing is the destruction of this key public service that so many Canadians depend on, that is this unique infrastructure of having these offices in so many communities around the country that could be used so effectively to serve Canadians in so many different ways, to improve the services that are delivered to the public, and especially to those people who could most need them, whether that's postal banking, checking in on seniors, all these different things that Canada Post workers could do in the community to improve communities, to make people's lives better. And it's especially egregious to me that it comes at a time when Mark Carney can't shut up about projects in the national interest and nation building projects. It's like, that's what Canada Post is. Canada Post built this nation. We can have all our criticisms of Canada that we want to have, but like, Canada Post is an essential institution, and we're basically seeing them kill it through death by 1,000 cuts. And I think I have so many criticisms of the Carney government, but I feel like this is the thing that really like just broke me, and was the thing where it's like, these people are irredeemable in my eyes because I care so much about Canada Post.
Yeah. You guys should have seen the texts I got from Paris when this news came out.
Yeah. I was so mad.
Yeah. But it is. It's a really it feels like a really major point, not only for Canadian identity, but also the just labor rights in Canada. I mean, it feels like a real flashpoint and a real like emblematic moment. And I don't know, it's very upsetting and very frustrating to see the direction that we're headed in, especially when it feels like there aren't a lot of other, there's not really strong progressive options in our government right now. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I did want to leave some time if you guys had any questions that you wanted to put in the super chats or throw our way. But maybe just quickly, while we give them a minute to come up with those, did you want to tell people where they can keep up with your work, Paris, first?
I don't work actually. No, I make a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us. I generally have a newsletter called Disconnect, but because I'm writing a book, it's been a bit slow lately, admittedly. And I'm on a lot of social media platforms, but the one I post on more regularly is BlueSky. We'll see. Maybe I'll do some more video stuff at some point, but I'm an old school text boy.
So while we wait to see if any other questions come in, the other thing I wanted to give us a chance to do, if they didn't immediately flow in, was talk a little bit about NDP leadership. Because, speaking of potential progressive options in the country, I mean, the race is starting to take shape. I threw up everyone's faces for those of you who are watching on video, but there's Abby Lewis, Rob Ashton, Heather McPherson, Tennille Johnston, and those are all of the confirmed candidates. And then I did put a little tiny Eve Engler because he's very vocal, but he's not, it sounds like he hasn't even applied yet. So that's apparently part of his strategy. But yeah, this is sort of what we're looking at right now. Paris, what are your thoughts on this race as it's taking shape?
I actually didn't know the second woman to join. I've also been out of the loop for the past.
Yeah, that was just
while.
yesterday, I believe. So
yeah, okay.
She's the first Indigenous woman to ever run for the NDP, and I believe she's a social worker.
Okay, cool, awesome. I'll have to learn more about her candidacy. So I can't comment on her because I'm just not familiar. I would say. McPherson joining is not surprising, and I think that she's going to kind of try to build on the credibility that she built from being the foreign affairs critic, or whatever that title is, basically the work that she's been doing on Palestine in particular over the past year or so. So I don't think that's particularly surprising. Abby Lewis obviously came out of the gate with a lot of energy, has a lot of, kind of work behind him, I guess, has been preparing for this for quite some time. He's obviously run a few times to become an NDP MP and has lost because I would argue of his choice of riding. And in an interview that he did with Power and Politics, he essentially suggested that, like, if he's elected leader, he'll just find a different riding where he knows he's going to win this time instead of being in the one he'd prefer to win in that, he knows the Liberals are going to get. So I think we'll see. I actually find the Labor guy, what's his name? Rob something, I think.
Rob Ashton, yeah.
Yeah, Rob Ashton. I find him really compelling. I'm like curious to learn more about his candidacy. I don't know. I feel like most people didn't see him coming, and maybe he could be like kind of like a dark horse candidate in a sense. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Eve Engler, fuck Eve Engler.
Yeah. I feel like he's not a very serious candidate. But no. Anyway,
he's using it for clout. Let's be real.
I dealt with some real heavy reply guys. It's mostly just Eve himself spamming my replies when I shared the story about his candidacy. So we do have one super chat, but it's more of just a comment. So I'll throw it up, but it just says, conservative Carney is a Trojan horse. Awful. I think that reflects how a lot of folks feel right now. So thank you so much for the super chat. Let's see if there's any other questions that we can take. How
are you feeling about the NDPers though, Rachel?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
So I'm still in wait and see mode. I am excited. I'm excited to see, that it's not just Heather McPherson taking center stage. I didn't love her comments about the NDP. She made a comment that Leah Gazan actually came out and spoke against about there not needing to be purity tests for the NDP. I just think that that's kind of unnecessary, particularly in this political climate, because I think that it's not so much that people are subject to purity tests as it is that attempts to be inclusive get trotted out by, bad faith social media accounts and subject you to bad faith attacks. So if you allow those attacks to mitigate your efforts to be inclusive, that's just cowardice instead of, and it's not leadership. So I wasn't a big fan of that, which is too bad because I really liked Heather's stuff on Palestine. Abby Lewis, I liked what I saw in his Power and Politics interview. He was saying a lot of the right things about billionaires. Rob Ashton, I don't know if you saw that viral video of him just railing. Like, he's just like a classic union guy. And I think we really needed to see that in this race. And I really enjoyed his energy. He's like,
me too.
Like Karl Marx mixed with grandpa. I don't know. Like, it was good
People
vibes.
might be down for that, like
yeah.
Move these like slick talkers to the side, these deceptive guys who are on the one hand selling us elbows up and giving us elbows down, and on the other hand, selling us like this kind of lower housing prices and better deal for workers that is actually totally in the bag of capital. And like I don't know, a kind of brash union guy could really
I'd love to see him in the House of Commons. I hope he runs, even if he doesn't get leadership. But he's obviously very busy with his union work, so I don't know, we'll see. And then Tennille, I've actually heard from some folks sort of I've heard some excitement from more sort of younger very progressive NDPers that they're just excited, first of all, to have someone who isn't white running, because otherwise it's like a pretty pasty slate. And also just Tennille, I think is fairly progressive. And so I'm excited to hear more from her. I haven't heard a ton from her yet. And I think I covered everyone there, except for Eve. But again, he hasn't been approved yet. So
speaking of like young progressive and stuff, did you see that the BC Greens have a new leader, and I believe she's 24 years old. I'm pretty like
Emily
intrigued.
Lowen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I actually haven't had a chance to really look into her, but I keep getting people tagging me and stuff about her. So I need to take some time to get acquainted, because I love seeing, young women get into politics, particularly at this time when we're seeing so much regression in so much of our society.
On the show, maybe.
Yeah, maybe I should reach out. Let me know if you guys would like that. And we got 2 more super chats here that I'll just quickly bring up and we can react to, and then we'll probably wrap it up. So Cristiano Terrien says, "We love you both and your work. Thank you for being there for us." Thank you for being here for us. We really appreciate it. And thanks for the support. And then Crotchy once again, some of your usernames that you're making me read into the podcast, says, "I've had it podcast calls it credibility testing." And I think that's in reference to what we were just discussing about purity tests. I like that. That's
and like
really
you did
framing.
in one of your TikToks, Don Davies has been saying stuff like that as well, which is like disappointing.
Yeah, I just think it's the wrong tack. I mean, not everyone in our politics has to move more to the right. You don't have to do it.
Exactly. It's like, I feel like there's some of those NDPers who are like, this is really the opportunity to present a progressive alternative, right? We have the extreme right Conservative Party and the right wing Liberal Party. And it's like, okay, let's offer something really different. And then there's this other wing of the NDP that's like, oh, look, they've vacated the like Trudeau version of the Liberal Party. We can move even more in that direction and try to present ourselves as like the real centrists this time. And it's like, come on, guys.
I know, it's just exhausting. The people yearn for a real progressive option.
Elizabeth May. Yeah.
She's still here, so
she's
not
still
going
here.
Anywhere. All right. Well, Paris, thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure, as always. I could talk to you for another 4 hours, so I'm gonna cut myself off. My screen just died, but you're still here. So
your computer decided to cut you off on
I don't know what just happened there. It's like, you're out of time. Let Paris leave. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Paris. Thank you all for being here. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks, Paris.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Bubble Pop. I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing on YouTube, Patreon, Substack, or wherever you like to listen. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, and BlueSky. I'd like to give a special thank you to Hans Vivian Wenzel for making the incredibly groovy music for Bubble Pop. You can find more of his stuff on Spotify under the artist name Hans. That's a lowercase h with an exclamation mark. Thank you again for spending this time with me. This is my dream job. I know I say that every week, but that's because it's true every week, and I couldn't do it for 1 second without your support. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.